I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. Senator Dick Durbin spoke in support of the Honoring Our Pact Act on the Senate floor Monday. The bipartisan legislation would help veterans who were exposed to toxic substances get access to health care. The majority whip said that the measure is about keeping, quote, promises we made to veterans if they risked their lives for our nation and became wounded as a result, we would not leave them behind. Listen in to the Illinois Democrats' wide-ranging remarks.
Madam President, I got the news, along with others, Sunday morning about the decision of the 10 Republican and Democratic senators to move forward with a proposal to deal with our nation's epidemic of gun violence. I had a conversation with Senator Chris Murphy, who has been one of our leaders on the Democratic side, about exactly what that meant and the help that we might be able to offer to him from the Senate Judiciary Committee. I just want to say at this moment that I really want to commend my colleagues on both sides, Democrats and Republicans. I believe they made a good faith effort to negotiate a package of reforms. Senator Murphy, Senator Cornyn of Texas made it bipartisan, timely, and I believe did an excellent job. Is it the package that I would have written? No, nor yours, Madam President. You would have included things, and I would have included others. But it is within our reach. We have a bitterly, politically divided nation. That's a fact. We have a Senate Judiciary Committee evenly divided 50-50. We have a chamber evenly divided 50-50. And so it's difficult to say that any one party or one person will get exactly what they want in this political atmosphere. But it's equally important to note that we've all gone home and gotten the message over and over again, whether it was a reference to a supermarket killing in Buffalo, a school, a fourth grade school class in Uvalde, Texas, or a doctor and other bystanders being killed in a Tulsa, Oklahoma hospital. All of that has occurred in the last few days. And the American people have reacted with one voice, and they have said to us two words: do something. To members of Congress, don't just tell us you're going to give us your thoughts and prayers. Do something. Well, I think this decision to move forward could help. Every provision in this agreement could save a life. For that reason, if for no other, I will be supporting it. This agreement would support red flag laws. That's one way they characterize them. Crisis intervention orders is another. Many states, 19, already have them. It would also close dangerous gaps in the federal law that enables domestic abusers, boyfriends, to get guns. I want to commend Senator Klobuchar, who has been the leader in the United States Senate on that issue. We tried to help her on a previous piece of legislation and didn't have the votes to do it, but if it's included in this package, I will definitely support it and thank her for her leadership. It also would strengthen the background check system by clarifying which gun sellers are required to conduct background checks. That's a step in the right direction. I hope there's more coming. The agreement would provide funds for desperately needed mental health and trauma support services, including more school counselors for enhanced school safety. Madam President, I can't tell you how critically important that is. Half of the people who die because of a gun in America commit suicide. It is a plea for help that we should be answering. This could help. We also know that some of the people who pick up these guns and go shooting children and innocent people have serious mental illness problems. They need counseling too, and we need to find ways to reach to them. And I also want to add that we have a different form of gun violence in big cities like Chicago. Many of these crimes are committed by kids in gangs. And these kids, 90% plus of them, have been victims of trauma in their lives. Things have happened to them which they can never forget, and they need help to deal with them. So mental health counseling, trauma counseling is critical to reducing gun violence at all these three different levels. Importantly, the framework would crack down on straw purchases and illicit trafficking of guns. Madam President, last August, an amazing young woman who was a Chicago policewoman, Ella French, was on duty with her partner, sitting in the squad car, and a man walked up and shot her in the head and killed her. Then he shot the other officer and blinded him in one eye. The gun that he used to kill that policewoman was the subject of a straw purchase. What does that mean? That means that he could never have cleared a background check. He was a convicted felon. So he finds a friend or a girlfriend to go in and buy it who have no criminal records, and then they hand the gun over to him, and he turns around and kills a wonderful Chicago policeman. The outpouring of sentiment in favor of Ella French and her family was overwhelming. And I hope that we can get this provision, which I worked on with Senator Collins and Leahy, included in the final passage, to tighten up the penalties on those who make straw purchases. If you're going to stand up and lie to buy a gun so that you can give it to someone who can't pass a background check, you ought to pay dearly for that. It cost Ella French her life, and I hope that we can stick with this provision all the way through. The last point's especially important because I've met her mother, I've met the officer who was in the car with her, I've met his family, and I know how much this particular incident meant to each and every one of their lives. Madam President, does an agreement like this do everything that I would like? No, it doesn't. But this, if we can pass it, will be the most significant gun violence reform in 30 years in Congress. 30 years. We now have more guns than people in this country. They estimate some 400 million guns. They can't even give me anywhere close to an exact number of how many AR-15s we have in this country. I've heard estimates people are convinced of that range from 10 to 20 million of these AR-15 military assault type weapons. We have a long way to go before we reach the finish line, but I want to commend those senators who've worked so hard to bring us to this point and just make it very clear. I'm prepared to do everything I can as a senator and as whip to bring the votes together to get this done as quickly as possible. And now on another matter, Madam President. 2 weeks ago, the Education Department announced it would wipe out $5.8 billion in student loan debt owed by 560,000 borrowers who had attended for-profit Corinthian colleges in the last 20 years. Corinthian Colleges was one of the largest, most corrupt, most unscrupulous companies in the for-profit college industry, but it wasn't alone in its shady dealings, far from it. So the basic primer on for-profit colleges and universities, the question that you're going to face on the final exam is this: what two numbers tell the whole story about for-profit colleges and universities? The numbers 8 and 30. What do they mean? 8% of high school graduates go to for-profit colleges and universities. 8%. 30% of all the student loan defaults in the United States are students from for-profit colleges and universities. Why? Why are these students who attend for-profit schools failing to make their student loan payments? Well, first, these industries, for-profit industry schools, charge too much in tuition. So the students can't keep up with the debt, so they borrow more. They reach a point where something happens and they have to drop out, afraid of the debt that they've accumulated. Next stage, some finish. They take their diploma from their for-profit school and they learn, unfortunately, that it's almost worthless. Westwood College is one of those fraudulent for-profit colleges. It operated 15 campuses in 5 different states, including Illinois. Westwood College. I remember driving out to O'Hare Airport and looking up on the side of one of those tall office buildings, and they had a sign for Westwood College. And I thought, what a fraud. Like Corinthian College, Westwood used high-pressure sales and marketing tactics and outright lies to pressure students to take on huge amounts of student debt. Students in Westwood's criminal justice program in Illinois were told that a Westwood criminal justice degree would all but guarantee them a good-paying job with the local police department, maybe even the FBI. What a lie. Victoria Vinces is one of the thousands of Illinois students who heard those lies and is paying the price for them. Victoria is the first person in her family ever to attend college. And that's the case more often than not. These students who come from families with no college experience don't know where to turn. They look at the advertising and unfortunately fall for it and sign up for these for-profit schools like Westwood. Victoria enrolled in the criminal justice program at Westwood in 2007, believing it would help her land a job as a probation officer or maybe even with the Immigration Service. After 3 years juggling full-time jobs and going to school full-time, Victoria was shocked to learn that a Westwood degree would not pay off at all. At that time, she owed $50,000 in student loans that she'd taken out at Westwood. Not wanting to take out more loans for a useless degree, she dropped out. She started applying for law enforcement jobs, showing them the certificate of her transcript from Westwood, and they told her that's worthless. Victoria now works for the Illinois Domestic Violence Hotline. She likes her job, and she helps a lot of people, but she's never earned enough income to make the monthly payments on her student loans. Victoria Vinces isn't someone who shirks responsibility. She's helping to raise a niece and a nephew who live with her. She just doesn't believe that she should have to pay back $50,000 in loans because of the deception. I agree. Last week, I wrote to Education Secretary Miguel Cardona, asking him for a second time. And I like him, but if he doesn't start answering my letters, I'm going to have to think of a way to get his attention. I asked him to cancel the student loan debt of all former Westwood criminal justice students in Illinois who were defrauded by this company. I first made this request in April of last year. It's time for a response, Mr. Secretary. Last July, the Education Secretary canceled the student loan debts of 1,600 former Westwood students. Among them were 488 Illinois students who'd taken on debt to enroll in Westwood's worthless criminal justice program. These students had all applied for relief under something known as borrower defense that allows the Education Department to cancel their student debts. There's still more than 3,000 Westwood criminal justice students in Illinois who haven't gotten that same break. Some of them, like Victoria Vinces, have carried that debt for more than 10 years. It's ruined their credit ratings. It's made them harder for them to find a job, rent an apartment, think about a future. We've known for more than a decade that Westwood used misleading marketing tactics. Now they have to be called to account. The unethical behavior was documented in detail by Illinois' former Attorney General Lisa Madigan, who sued Westwood 10 years ago. I remember that. I joined her in the press conference announcing it. The Education Department also has concluded that Westwood defrauded its criminal justice program students in Illinois. The Education Department should grant automatic loan forgiveness for all of the approximately 3,000 students who are still burdened with Westwood's criminal justice program deception. During the Trump years, the Education Department decided to take a blind eye to the situation at these for-profit schools. The Trump administration actually hired people who worked in that industry for these schools to regulate them. You can guess what happened. No regulation. It's time for the Education Department to make a difference. And let me say, it's time for us to make a difference when it comes to student loan debt. It was in 1998 when we decided, in a bill which was loaded with extras that people didn't discover until long after it passed, a bill said you couldn't discharge your student loan in bankruptcy. If you had a mortgage on a home and filed for bankruptcy, you could discharge that mortgage, even on a second home, even on a car loan, even on a loan for a boat, even on a loan for appliances, just about everything except a student loan. Well, that was the wrong decision. That was a wrong policy. There are more than 3 million student loan borrowers who owe more than $100,000 in student loans. But we decided these would be non-dischargeable in bankruptcy. There's a provision in there that says if there's an extreme hardship, you might be able to discharge your loan. Almost never does a court rule that there's an extreme hardship. This situation is unsustainable. Senator John Cornyn in Texas and I have introduced a bipartisan bill to change it, to make sure the bankruptcy code gives student debt a break. I'll continue working with him and others to get this done. Bankruptcy should always be the last resort, but it ought to be an option for those who truly need relief, and these student borrowers do. Bottom line, even with other reform measures like relief for Corinthian college students, bankruptcy reform ought to be part of the solution to student debt crisis. I hope that it will. Madam President, I ask that statement I'm about to make be placed in a separate part of the record.
Without objection.
Madam President, I recently received a letter from a man in Chicago. He was writing on behalf of his dad, who was a Vietnam War vet, and he was writing for hundreds of thousands of other veterans just like his dad. These people are sick with illnesses connected to their military service. These veterans served our nation in many different wars, many different places and many different times, different branches of the military. They have one thing in common. They were unknowingly poisoned with toxic chemicals during their service. They came home from war, thought they were safe. They managed to escape the fate of some of their colleagues. But years and sometimes decades later, they became sick with rare cancers, debilitating lung diseases, heart conditions, and other illnesses as a result of toxic exposure during their service. One veteran said it's like an IED that goes off in your body 8, 10, 20 years after you're out of the service. Al LaHood is not related to the congressman or the congressman's son, but he's a father who my constituent wrote to me about. Al was 22 years old when he was drafted into the Army and went to Vietnam in 1968. He was an infantryman, a machine gunner, stationed at Camp Cucci, northwest of Saigon. He came home after a year with a Bronze Star for Valor, but he brought something else home, although he wouldn't know it for almost 50 years. His body had absorbed Agent Orange, the toxic defoliant used by the U.S. military in Vietnam to clear the jungles. After his service, Al LaHood earned a college degree and an MBA, got married, had a family, the American dream. Every 2 years, he and his Army buddies made a point of having a reunion somewhere. One by one over the years, his buddies started getting sick. Heart disease, prostate cancer, esophageal cancer. Turns out all related to the toxic exposure to Agent Orange. 4 years ago, the toxic time bomb caught up with Al LaHood. He was diagnosed with a rare form of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Last year, even worse news, diagnosed with another rare cancer. Doctors tell him he has a 30% chance of surviving for 5 years. The VA ruled that his cancers are service-related and declared Al 100% disabled. It amazes him to think that he now receives more in disability compensation each month that he received in combat pay for an entire year in Vietnam. People don't understand the true cost of war, Al says. Exposure to toxic substance is not new. In World War I, it was mustard gas. World War II, exposure to nuclear tests. Vietnam, Agent Orange. In the Persian Gulf War and the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, there was a new form of exposure. It was called burn pits. Military dug massive pits, filled them with everything imaginable, from ruined Humvees and aircraft to medical waste, human waste, computers, batteries, plastics, every bit of trash produced in a war on a military base. Then they doused it all with jet fuel and lit it on fire. The thick black smoke from the fire contained invisible, deadly chemicals. They filled the air and covered everything around. And the soldiers, they breathed it into their lungs and into their bodies. Al LaHood's son said his dad was concerned for the veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan. He hopes they receive early screening, so if they develop cancer, they just might be able to save their lives. Al and his family say they want more research into the kinds of rare cancers and other illnesses that toxic exposed veterans develop so they can be detected earlier. Al would give up gladly all of his disability payments if the money could be spent on research for illnesses that might hit his fellow victims exposed to toxic substances. I want Al LaHood and the hundreds of thousands of toxic exposed veterans, their families and caregivers to know. The United States Senate not only honors your service, we hear your voices. This week, the Senate is taking up Sergeant First Class Heath Robinson honoring our PACT Act. The PACT Act is the most important piece of veterans legislation in a generation. It's about keeping promises, the promises we made to veterans if they risked their lives for our nation and became wounded as a result. We would not leave them behind. They would have health care and benefits they needed and earned. The PACT Act builds on the historic Agent Orange Act. And let me at this point note the friend of mine, now deceased, was one of the major movers on the Agent Orange Act of 1991. His name was Lane Evans. He was from the Quad Cities in Illinois. He and I were elected to the U.S. House in the same year, 1982. Lane was a Vietnam-era veteran who came back determined to help his fellow veterans, and he made Agent Orange his cause. He recognized that illnesses caused by Agent Orange are actually war wounds, should be treated that way. The PACT Act takes that principle that Congressman Lane Evans stood for and applies it to other situations. They apply it to all American veterans from all wars exposed to toxic chemicals during their service, whether overseas or in the U.S. And as we continue to learn about the cost of exposure, it provides a framework to add more conditions related to toxic exposure in the future. Veterans will no longer have to fight a second war with the VA to prove their illness was service-related. They can focus on fighting their disease instead of fighting the bureaucracy. It is estimated that the PACT Act will affect 1 out of every 5 veterans, 3.5 million veterans in all. The Act directs the VA to devote resources and personnel needed to process new claims and treat new patients. In another provision, which I strongly support, the PACT Act directs the VA to work collaboratively with the Department of Defense and Health and Human Services and EPA. A whole of government search for better ways to detect, treat, and cure these hidden, deadly wounds of war. Our veterans deserve nothing less. Now, I've heard some critics say, this is going to cost a lot of money. Right, it just might do that. But can you think of a more deserving cause? Can you think of anything better than for us to really face the true causes of war and to stand by our veterans? Madam President, you know that story far better than I do. I have long supported this whole-of-government approach to research, especially at the VA, and treatment for our veterans. Many VA researchers are veterans themselves, determined to find innovative treatment and cures. I commend Senator John Tester of Montana and Senator Jerry Moran, their chairman and ranking member of the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee, for their leadership in producing this excellent, timely, historic, bipartisan bill. I especially thank the more than 60 veteran service organizations like the VFW. I spoke to their statewide convention in Springfield just last Friday, and so many others that helped produce this bill, and the veterans who fought to reach this point, fought sometimes literally with their last breath. I'll vote proudly for the PACT Act, and I urge my colleagues to do the same. Madam President, I yield the floor. Suggest the absence of a quorum.